by the time my son got to 5th grade, I really had no other option but to homeschool. And it turned out it wasn't the public-private thing that was the problem for him, it was the school part. And then his younger brother was capable, he was 2 years younger, he was capable of doing things in some subjects above his grade level, and they were trying to work with him, and you know, you can only do that to a certain extent. So we're like, okay, God's literally backed us into a corner. And this is where I tell people, like that old cliche, they say, oh, when God closes a door, he opens a window. And I say no. Sometimes he shuts that door and locks you in that room and says, you have to live in there. And that was the moment that we came to. At 17 years old, when I first met my husband, I met a family who was homeschooling. And I remember this moment, I went like, oh, that's ridiculous. Why would anybody do that? That's like overprotective. That's just too much, you know. I went to public school and I turned out fine. 17 years old, I had it all figured out, right? So fast forward, my son's now 10 years old, and I'm like, yep, he's not even going to public school, he's going to private school, and now I can't even picture myself homeschooling, but we worked it out. God made it happen. And then I was pregnant with my daughter at the same time. So our first year homeschooling was like a whirlwind. Like we'd never done it before. We had a baby. And we loved it. It was like the best thing that ever happened to our family. I went from thinking 6 months prior that, oh, when they go back to school in the fall and I have the baby, we're gonna have all these like idyllic days of just me and the baby and all, and then they were home all the time. And then when she was born, and then I realized how the relationship has developed between my kids over the years, because they were with her all the time, and that they taught her things too. So it wasn't even just a one-on-one thing. It was like we were all her teachers. And then I had another daughter about 4 years after that to bring my number up to 4. And even with the big age difference, they were 10 and 8 when my first daughter was born, and then 4 years later, my younger one. Like my 4 kids, when they get together, you think they're all the same age, because they just all interact with each other and love with each other. And that was a benefit of homeschooling that I never, ever anticipated, was the sibling relationships that would develop. I have a brother who's 3.5 younger than me, and honestly, I don't even know where he lives right now. I know he's in Florida. I don't have his address. He moved. We don't talk. It's sad, because we never did anything together. We were raised in the same house, but we had our different spheres. We were never really in the same school at the same time, and we just never had common experiences. So I don't have what my kids have. So I'm encouraged by that alone, that I have gotten to a point where I've even said that if academics really were bad in my house and we didn't succeed academically, I would still homeschool, because of all the other benefits that come with it. And I hope that you're experiencing some of those too, that you're seeing family relationships improve. I know from having gotten kids ready in the morning for school, the stress level between like 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning is really high. Nobody wants to get up, nobody can find their shoes, you're trying to get lunch, and everybody out the house and on the bus. And once all that's gone, it's like, you know, my mornings are calmer. I didn't start homeschooling because we like to wake up early. I am not one of those get up at the crack of dawn and get everybody going kind of people. We're really more of like, we ease into our day, we have a little bit of reading time, and you know, we used to maybe look at the paper or whatever. We're very, very lax in our house about our getting started time. We don't do school in our pajamas. I do kind of draw the line there. I don't know why, but that's important to me. But we do have a very kind of relaxed rhythm to our day. I didn't always start out that way. I really had a more rigid understanding of like we were gonna do school at home with the boys. And after a couple of years, I realized my older son like still hated school. So it took us some time to kind of figure out how he ticked and you know, what would work for him and what would keep him interested. And we were slow learners. And I think that was one of the moments where Cassandra had met me, when I started to kind of reinvent and rethink some of my curriculum choices and approaches. And I really say that I got to a point where if I had pushed my son on a like traditional rigorous high school schedule, I think he would have done it, and he probably would have done okay, but I would have lost him. Like, I don't think we would have a relationship. I think he would have hated me, and I didn't want that. So I've adopted the philosophy of not sacrificing the relationship with your child on the altar of academics. I think that's a really, really important lesson to learn. I think there are kids, my second oldest son, I could literally hand him a college-level physics book in 10th grade and say, here you go. I have no idea what's in this book. If you have any questions, maybe we can find somebody who can answer them. But at the end of the year, you're going to take a test, and you know, we'll see how we do. And he would ace all the tests. So there are kids that definitely can be pushed that way, and others that can't. So I think the beauty of homeschooling is being able to customize everything to, you know, what your kids do. And again, I hope, you know, you're learning that as well. So here I am 18 years later. My husband and I were involved initially in a support chapter of LEA, local 20 families. We got together once a month for a parent support meeting. We would do activities, some field trips, you know, group visits together to museums or whatever types of things. At the time, I didn't even realize that it was attached to a larger state organization, but somehow I knew because we did pay dues or whatever, and we got a magazine in the mail. But then around 2014, we were asked to visit with a couple of the board members, the president and the vice president and the communications director of LEA. And they were having some difficulties at the time with their mailing list database type of stuff. And what they were really looking for was my husband's skill set to kind of help them work their way through it. And at the same time, our chapter leader had graduated both of her kids and was really kind of looking for somebody to take over, but I didn't feel called to that at the time. And you know, we had babies and there were a lot of things going on in our house. But then when we were visited by, you know, with this request to join the board, we kind of looked at each other and we're like, well, we've been saying no to, you know, our friend now for a couple of years, that we're not ready to take on leadership of this small 20-family group. How can we turn around and say, you know, yes, we're going to be on the board of the state organization? And so we came to the conclusion that instead of saying no to both things, we said yes to both things, with the idea that, you know, that was his skill set that was needed, and the chapter stuff was probably more of mine. So we've been chapter leaders of this small support group called God and Family First LEA in the Western Suffolk South Shore area that has now grown to about 75 families. It's out of control because honestly, there are so many people that I don't even see on a regular basis. But there's a core group that, you know, we're connected, and we still are getting together, not quite monthly for parent meetings, but pretty regularly, field trips and activities as we can plan. We're doing a lot of outdoor stuff since COVID, a hike every month, field day. We did pie day for math games in a park. We do puzzle day. We just did a teen game day. So just kind of like a lot of informal get-togethers. And Homeschool New York, LEA, has been around since 1988. And came about because of two families in particular that decided to take their kids out of school and homeschool. And it turns out in New York at that time it was illegal. And those two families were facing charges of truancy for not having their kids in school. And homeschooling had become legal in other states. It was a state-by-state battle. And at some point, a settlement was reached. A couple of these families, they really were faced with a jail time, but at the time that the court case was going to be heard, HSLDA, which I think most of you have heard of, but we'll talk about them too, managed to reach an agreement with the state education department and come up with Commissioner's Regulations 100.10, which I think we all know what those are. And that's been the law of the land for homeschooling ever since. And they've never, ever changed. They are exactly the same as they were in 1988. Other states have modernized their homeschool laws. Some of them have done away with some of the more draconian parts, given parents more freedom, but not in New York. We're stuck with 30-year-old regulations and all the things that go along with them. But those were our founders. And so they had obviously a calling and a drive and a motivation to do something that was outside the norm, countercultural, probably wasn't even looked on very fondly among their church, fellow church members. Maybe their pastors didn't understand what they were doing. Everybody thought maybe they were a little crazy. So I kind of feel like we're in an environment now where we can relate to that kind of mindset. And from those families, they formed these support chapters all over the state, and they realized that they needed to have other flesh and blood families who had like-minded principles and goals and ideas on how they wanted to educate their children and keep God in the center of their families. And so that's where our organization has grown from. We have about, I want to say, 80 to 85 chapters across the state. We've added just a few more in the last year. We have some chapters upstate that are entirely sports chapters. We have chapters that have co-ops. We have chapters that are very formal in their requirements. They have a very distinct Christian personality. They invite, they interview potential members. They want to know about family faith and church practices and all that kind of stuff. And we have other chapters in the state that are just like, you know what, we're a Christian organization, come be a part of us as long as you're comfortable being around us. You know, we're going to do everything, you know, according to what we believe, but we're not going to, you know, force everybody to believe it. So we have chapters of all flavors all across the state. We have 7 in the what we call the downstate area. We have our city chapters, but here on Long Island, we have a Nassau-based one. We have mine that's based in Lindenhurst. We have Huntington. We have a Sayville one, and we have a Patchogue one, and we have a Bohemia one. So our goal is to connect families that are homeschooling to other families and to encourage those relationships and help people to find that kind of support. Now, I know you get a lot of that here, and I'm grateful for that, because I know, obviously, Cassandra knows a lot about homeschooling, and she's got all the fellow moms that she has here helping out that can certainly answer all those questions. But I want to tell you a little bit more about the other things that we do. And in addition to in-person flesh and blood support, we do have a quarterly magazine that that you're entitled to with your membership, and we have articles written by our special needs coordinator. We have a special needs coordinator that helps families navigate through the whole IEP, IESP, how to customize curriculum for kids who learn differently, modifications that you can make, some extra, you know, testing and insight for struggling learners who maybe don't fit into the IEP category. You know, they don't fail their psych ed testing, but something's still not quite right. She can, you know, help you navigate through some of those other glitches that there might be in audio and visual learning and stuff like that. So we have that. Our articles will cover everything from, you know, how to teach math to maybe something encouraging for a mom or a dad or something like that. So that's every quarter. We have a page where people send in pictures of the activities that their chapters do. So we try to kind of keep the state connected that way by seeing, you know, what is going on across the state. We have a presence in Albany, which has taken on a somewhat different form since COVID, since they don't actually let you in. But we do keep in touch with legislators and Board of Education members. We attended Regents meetings in person when you were allowed to, and now we keep track of them virtually. And we lobby for causes that are related to homeschooling, whether it's bills that come up that will affect us adversely or trying to encourage ones that might benefit homeschoolers. Probably in the last few years, the 2 biggest issues that come up, we have legislation that's written, and then because of the way the parties change in the legislative branches, we get varying levels of support for it. But homeschool sports. So playing sports in interscholastic teams is not allowed in New York for homeschoolers, but it is in 36 other states. Everybody knows Tim Tebow. Tim Tebow got to where he is because Florida allows homeschoolers to play sports with the local high school, and that's where he got drafted from. So we try and make a case that, you know, homeschoolers are part of the same community that the public schools are, and in many places in the state, not so much around here, that if there is no ability to play on the school team, there's no opportunity for sports at all for a homeschooler, because maybe they live somewhere where the club teams are just not as well organized, or they're really way too expensive. So that is something that we are trying to get a law passed for. And this is an area where we feel we reach out to kind of all homeschoolers, not just members. You know, I know Cassandra communicates stuff to you guys if things come up. So hopefully you see that and you think of yourself as part of the homeschooling community, even if you're not a member of our organization. But we do have a place in our organization for what we call at-large members. So even if there's not a chapter membership that works for you, because maybe, you know, you don't have the time, you're a working parent, you know, you're coming to these things, you can still join and be an at-large member and still, you know, be in communication with us, have access to the special needs coordinator, get the magazine, see what we're doing legislatively. And then in this past year, we started adding in some membership benefits. So over the past year, we've had various discounts to curriculum or free items, planner. We had a workshop that an author of a book gave, and then there was an online course that's usually like $99 that was available for free to members this year. We offer discount on the Iowa testing through BJU Press, so if you're in need of annual testing, that's another benefit that you can get. So we feel like we offer a lot of things for the $30 that you would pay as a family, plus we have a discount code that gives you $15 off of your HSLDA membership. And I find lately when I meet new homeschoolers, usually they've joined HSLDA already, whereas in the past we used to tell them who they were. So if you don't know who HSLDA is, I'll just tell you really quick. They are a national homeschool advocacy and like lawyer-based membership organization. And they are the ones that fought the fight in every state to make homeschooling legal and continue to monitor the homeschooling environment in each state and deal with issues as they come up. Usually it's like a rogue superintendent here or somebody asking for more paperwork than they're supposed to get. If you live in the Huntington School District, you might be aware that a very nicely scathing letter was written to them within the last 2 weeks to tell them to knock it off, that parents are qualified to do the end of the year assessment. So I don't know if any of you were aware of those communications, but they have since let parents know, yes, you can give your child the end of the year assessment. So we appreciate when HSLDA has the teeth behind, having a lawyer send a letter and, being able to kind of advocate on those issues. We do work very closely with them. They, when we have meetings with legislators and the education department employees, TJ Schmidt, who is the HSLDA lawyer that takes care of New York, he's always right there alongside of us. The other piece of legislation that we just had introduced in the last 2 weeks, he actually helped us with the wording. We have on our board, upstate New York, Michael Bailey is our legislative liaison. And his assemblywoman, Carrie Werner, who is a Democrat but is just very fair-minded, we've been telling her and other legislators for years about the problems with getting a letter of substantial equivalence. So I don't know how many of you have kids heading into the high school years, but you may know that homeschoolers don't get a recognized diploma as in the eyes of the New York State Education Department. So you issue a diploma because they graduated from your homeschool and you write their transcript. And in 49 other states, that's not a problem. You apply, you're a homeschooler, they have things that they ask you for, and your kid gets into college. In New York, they want a diploma or its equivalents, which there are. You can take the GED exam and it's an easy kind of out, and they tell me that there isn't as much of a stigma attached to that as there used to be. I don't know how true that is, but my feeling is that if you have worked hard with your homeschool high school student and you have completed the 4 years with the 7 documents each year and have fulfilled all the requirements and taught all the subjects and poured your blood, sweat, tears, and prayers into their education, to turn around and give them a document that says, well, you're just about as good as a high school dropout. That's wrong. It's not fair. The GED, the equivalency exam, is there for people who need it, who got a little, derailed in their high school years and they want to get their life back together and move on and get serious about what they're doing. That's not a homeschool student. So the one kind of easier way that the state education department gave us for equivalency and a diploma is to ask for a letter of substantial equivalence from your superintendent, which basically is just supposed to be, yep, this student sent in all 7 documents for all the high school years. We have everything on file. And because they complied with the regulations, they have completed the substantial equivalence of a 4-year high school education. Sounds easy, right? We did a lot of work to get to that point. Well, it's not required for them to write it, unfortunately. The state education department strongly recommends they do. They can't really think of any reason why they wouldn't. But there are a significant number of superintendents across the state who have an ideological opposition to writing those words, substantial equivalence. So many school districts might write a completion letter. The New York Department of Education writes a letter that says, yep, this kid is now too old to be a homeschooler. They did some paperwork, ask the parent for the rest of the information. And guess what? Colleges will not take that as a letter. They will say, no, this is not a substantial equivalence letter, and the City Board of Education has not budged. They won't include any other wording in their letter. There are some school districts on Long Island that will only write the words completed, but some of the schools seem to kind of take it anyway because it's from the superintendent. But there have been some schools that want to see those particular words, substantial equivalence. So back to Carrie Werner upstate. She helped us, or we helped her write legislation to say, hey, this is what the regulations say you have to do. And the regulations say that part of the reason the regulations was written was to determine the substantial equivalence of education being done at home. So hey, if we're doing what the regulations say, then we are doing the substantial equivalence. So it doesn't seem like it should be that hard to ask for the letter. So the legislation that was written will now require the letter to be written if the parents have been in compliance with the regulations through high school. So I don't know if you are as familiar with the legislative process in New York, but if you have a bill in one branch, you need a same as in the other. So what we're working on now is getting a same as in the Senate, which is proving a little tricky because you know, we're a small organization. There's only 20, maybe 30,000 homeschoolers in the state, maybe 50. We have grown in numbers in the last couple of years. And there's opposition, you know, like I said, in the city, they don't even want to use the words. So we are trying to set up meetings with kind of some key senators to show them the legislation and ask them if they'd be willing to support it and, you know, to even co-sponsor or sponsor a piece of legislation and introduce it and kind of, you know, let us take it from there. You know, once you have a bill, usually legislators are a little bit more willing to talk to you. So one of the things that we encourage is at the local level to stay in touch with your local legislator. You know who they are, know where their home office is, and stop in from time to time. Maybe if a bunch of you live in the same district, make an appointment for 3 or 4 families to go in. And you can just talk about why you homeschool, talk about, you know, ways that you think they could be supportive. Sometimes they surprise you. I have found that the majority of the time when you walk in as a homeschooler to a state legislator, whether it's a senator or an assembly person, they often have no idea what it takes to homeschool in New York. Honestly, about 5 years ago, we went to a meeting with the state education department to kind of talk about these issues. And they didn't know what the regulations were. They didn't know every single step. State Education Department, the assistant commissioner who oversees the homeschooling guidelines, did not know all of the steps. So we had to go through and say what a letter of intent was, what the IHIP was, what the quarterly was, what happens sometimes in school districts with the quarterlies or whatever. So don't assume that they know what it takes to homeschool. And sometimes when they become aware of this, and you always bring your kids because they do love meeting kids. When they start thinking of these issues in terms of this constituent that I met with this child, this high school student who maybe can't get into the school they want to next year because of a piece of paper that they deserve to have, it gives them a little bit more motivation to do the right thing rather than just pass paper along and not think about the consequence that it has. You know, this is a case in point that we've been trying to make for a few years, especially with the sports bills, as we bring high school students to them from school districts that don't have teams because they don't have enough kids who live in that town to field a high school team. And so now here's a couple of families with 3 kids that, you know, could join that team and help that school district out rather than just making it a kind of ideological or administrative decision. It comes down to an individual that they've met. So becoming civically active, I think, is something I would encourage you to do, and we have ways of encouraging that to happen. So that would be another benefit of membership in our organization. And just so that you know, even if you're not a member of our organization, these legislative efforts are for all homeschoolers across the state. And we really do try to bring people in. We try to communicate outside of the organization when these things come up, because we all are citizens of the same state and we have that right. And, you know, more people, louder voices, more likely to get heard. If individual legislators feel that there's nobody in their district that this is affected by, they might be less motivated to think about it. But once they start saying, no, I've got 5 families that made an effort to come see me and they're telling me there's more, I think that makes a difference. It's time consuming. It can be intimidating when you first do it. But usually they're very willing to meet with their own constituents. And they're in Albany now most of the time until about probably second week of June. I think they're going to end. But then they're in their home offices a lot in between those other times. So, and they have people there, so you can always call, make an appointment, drop in, and just kind of say, hey, is there any reason why Senator so-and-so would be opposed to this? Or can I explain to you why it would be beneficial for them to support this bill? And you'd have a bill number, or at least just the basic idea about what the legislation is about. So that's another thing that we do. I'm trying to think what else I want to talk about our organization doing. We try to keep our finger on the pulse of homeschooling across the nation. My husband and I attend a national conference every year where we interact with state leaders from all over the country and some parts of Canada as well, which kind of helps keep us motivated to come back to New York to continue to fight for a little bit more freedom, because we are the most regulated state in the nation. I don't know if you realize that New York really requires way more reporting than any other state does. New Jersey, right next door, nothing. You just start homeschooling. They don't even have to know who your kid is or how old they are, nothing. Connecticut is very lax too. Pennsylvania probably comes close, and they have kind of a different flavor. They have to do a portfolio review every year where they have to meet somebody and show the kids' work throughout the year, but a lot of portfolio reviewers are homeschoolers themselves, so it's a very friendly process. But most states really don't have nearly as much as what New York does. And so we're always kind of trying to make the case that, look, homeschoolers in other states are not falling behind, they're not delinquent, they're not truant, they're not academically deficient. So why not give parents more freedom, especially because school districts are so hostile sometimes over what's on your paperwork and nitpicking about things, or they don't understand. Let's do away with quarterly reports. What's the point of quarterly reports, Just give parents a little bit more freedom to not have to worry about every deadline and being checked up on and all that kind of stuff, because it's not the requirements of the paperwork that made us good homeschoolers. It's because we're invested in the life and education of our children, and that's our motivation. And we obviously know we have support networks across the state. We keep each other informed. I think, if anything, and I know Cassandra could probably attest to this, most homeschoolers are eager to do more than what's required of them. So the idea that homeschoolers are somehow lazy or unengaged or disengaged or just not doing right by their children, I think just flies in the face of every family I've ever met. That's just not the case. We're always so critical of ourselves that we're not doing enough, or we're not covering the material, or Johnny's not finishing the book. Well, I can tell you, when my boys came home from their Christian school each year with the unfinished workbooks and stuff that we had picked up from I couldn't believe the amount of empty pages there were in these books. So I can tell you, they're not covering everything that's in those books. And they're in those buildings 6 hours a day. They're not doing 6 hours worth of work every day. So your child should not be doing 6 hours of work every day, because it's a more efficient way of getting stuff done. It's, go over it, cover it. Do you understand it? Yeah, move on. Do you know this already? Yeah, let's just skip it and do something else. Oh, look, it's a nice day out. Let's go do something outside instead and just go off the plan. These are all things that you should be giving yourself permission to do on a regular basis. If your child is awake and alive and engaged with the rest of the family, they are learning. It doesn't have to be from a book. It doesn't have to be at the table. It doesn't have to be on the computer. It doesn't have to be a box that you check off. So I can encourage you to think about homeschooling as more of a lifestyle rather than just an academic choice. Not to feel controlled by your curriculum, not to feel that like, oh, we hate this, but so-and-so said this is the best math program, so we're gonna grit through it and do it. I did that for 6 years with Saxon math. Now I know a lot of people like Saxon math, and that's why I used it, because it was so highly spoken of, and I thought, well, this is the best math curriculum, look at how much it covers. My kids hated Saxon, and like I said, it took me 6 years before I discovered Life of Fred. And can I tell you, there are a lot of people that hate Life of Fred, but it saved math instruction in my house because it was fun, and it was kind of like offbeat. The humor is sarcastic and odd, and the whole premise of a 6-year-old college professor who teaches math and lives under the desk in his office, But all of a sudden, math became part of his life, and so everything that Fred does has to do with whatever math concept is being introduced in that chapter. And so we didn't have pages and pages of problems to do anymore that just kind of were like numbers on a page. We actually had oh, hey, look. He, in the elementary book, every single day, Fred walks out past the vending machines. There are 9 vending machines in the hallway, 4 on the right, 5 on the left, which reinforces the concept, 4 plus 5 is 9. But there wasn't pages and pages of 4 plus 5 equals what, They just kind of learned it experientially by going through the page. So that's how we ended up learning that what curriculum might work for one person is not necessarily the best for the next, and you should feel free to change and experiment and try and mix things up, and it's okay. We say that the curriculum is not your master, it's your tool, and honestly, all of your curriculum is secondary to shaping the character of your child. That should be first and foremost, and to the extent that your curriculum does that, use it. To the extent that it interferes with that, push it aside. When you have days when you're dealing with whatever struggle it is, I'm telling you, it may be the math, there might be something going on there, but chances are it's probably something else that needs to be worked out between you and your child, or something bigger on their heart, or some discipline that needs to happen, or anything like that. So and I think that was probably what my biggest realization was when I brought my son home from school, that he was having discipline problems in school that I didn't really fully appreciate, because they didn't tell me. They dealt with it on their own. And so they maybe wouldn't have dealt with it in the same way I would have, or in some cases, I felt that they let things go on too long before correcting it or before bringing me into the process. And so now that I had him home, I realized I had to kind of be a little more keyed into him and understand him a little bit better, and to put that kind of character shaping as a priority over how much work we got done in a certain day. Taking the time to say, you know what, we're going to enjoy this moment in our house right now, because all the kids are getting along. I can't tell you, the biggest obstacle to work in my house has always been my kids are getting along. That the 4 of them are off playing somewhere, and I'm like, am I supposed to stop this now and tell everybody they got to come down and do their science lesson? Like, that didn't make sense to me. So those are the kind of lessons that I think you learn along the way that, it's hard to let go of, because you feel like we'll never get there, or we'll never get caught up, or we'll be behind, or we won't get it done. And I think, you just kind of have to look at it as an ebb and flow, and how much of life gives lessons, right? So I don't want to just ramble forever. I know, we have a lot of time, so I don't know if anybody has questions about, anything homeschooling related, but certainly about Homeschool New York. Leah, we do have a conference coming up. We used to have a downstate conference every year for many years that was, big and robust. In the era of conferences, states have done conferences for years, and they are kind of on the downswing now, but we still do, like I said, we value the idea that you can get instruction and encouragement from somebody in person. So this is our first year bringing it back. It's going to be kind of small scale, nuts and bolts, kind of bare bones thing, but it's going to be at the West Sayville Reformed Baptist Church on Rollstone Avenue. Pastor Andrew and Ingeberg and his wife Anna Leah are there. There's a new Leah chapter that's been meeting there since the fall, and they are the primary driving factors behind getting this conference going, so I'm very grateful for them. We're bringing up 2 educational consultant speakers from HSLDA. Anita Gibson is going to come and give 4 workshops on homeschooling through high school. Sherry K. Sessions is going to come and do 4 workshops on special needs homeschooling. And we have a 3rd track on new to homeschooling, which we are drawing on the experience and generosity of our resident veteran homeschoolers to talk about Homeschool 101, paperwork, how to pick curriculum, how to make those decisions. And we have a panel of homeschool graduates. They're going to come and answer whatever questions they're asked. So we have from high school on up to married with kids, so who have all been homeschooled for their educational experience, who are willing to talk about what that meant for them. Because I think a lot of parents, it's one thing for mom to talk about homeschooling, but what did the kid think? So Cassandra's, at least one of yours, right, if not 2, are going to come and speak, and Jude's son is going to come, and so it should be a good time. It's going to be June 10th and 11th. They're both going to come. Okay, June 10th and 11th. Friday night, we're going to start with a time of fellowship, worship, getting to know each other, and each of our Homeschool Leah chapters is going to give you a little rundown of what they do and what they're like. Part of the motivation for that night too is to encourage people to form new chapters. So if that's something that you think might work for you or you're interested in, or you have a group of families where you're like, we're getting together on a regular basis anyway, can we make this more formal? Talk to us about what that means. But that'll be Friday night, and then Saturday will be the workshops. Like I said, there'll be 3 tracks. You can pick 1 of 3 tracks, and then there'll be one session set aside where moms and dads are going to go off for separate encouragement from special speakers that we have. So I really hope to see people signed up for that. We're very excited to have a convention on Long Island again.
I have a question. I have a mic. I'll pass it around. As far as what's happening up in Albany with homeschooling, how it's grown the last couple of years, you talked a little bit about the Pulse, but what do you see, what's the thought process up there?
Yeah, so I'm curious to see as the numbers grow. Prior to 2019, there were about just under 25,000 homeschool students in New York, among 3.5 million school-aged children in the state. So it was a small fraction. I don't think it really kind of gained the notoriety of any individuals at a state level or anything like that. I mean, of course, certainly at school district levels, we knew that there was animosity in different places. But we also knew that as a whole, homeschoolers were doing really well in New York. We test every year pretty much for a lot of grades, and we didn't have lots and lots of students on academic probation for any reason. Honestly, when I talk to TJ about it every year, I go, do you hear about anybody on academic probation? He goes, I got like 2 phone calls. And he goes, and honestly, if they had contacted us sooner, they wouldn't have been on academic probation. They just didn't know how to handle what their school district was asking for, or they didn't know they could, retest or whatever, or they didn't know that they could show a year's academic growth another way. So we don't have this big problem of academic probation in New York. So to me, that's a big kind of badge of honor that we should wear, that even though we are so accountable to the state, they're not catching people not doing what they're supposed to do. So we are all doing what we're supposed to do. I think the interesting landscape that's changed since 2019 has been the idea of co-ops. Prior to 2019, a co-op was a group of families who kind of lived near each other or went to church together or just kind of had kids the same age, and they decided, you know what, you're really good at science, I'm really good at math, this one likes to do drama, why don't we meet with the kids once a week and we'll each take turns teaching them in these respective areas. Maybe we have a Spanish teacher, maybe every now and then we pay for an art teacher to come in and teach the kids an art class. So like nobody's making money on it. It was truly a cooperative effort. And then 2019 came and we had a whole bunch of people who were homeschooling and forced into it, and that was horrible the way that happened, and they gave you no time to adjust. And people came up with creative ways to still have their kids learning, but maybe parents weren't always involved. They had drop-off places. Some of them are 5 days a week, all day. And they're calling them co-ops. And there's nothing cooperative about them. Parents are literally dropping their kids at the door and coming back 6 hours later. Some of these places are skirting around the time limit law for how long kids can be in the care of somebody that's not their parent. By one company handles the stuff that happens in the morning, and another company handles the stuff that happens in the afternoon. And the state education department really hasn't given a whole lot of guidelines about what it means to homeschool in a group setting, other than to say that if it's for the majority of the education, then it's considered a private school. And they never told us, well, what do you mean by majority? Because what we think of as majority might be something different. And I know, mathematically, a lot of people have come up with that 51% number. I mean, that makes sense. 51% certainly is a majority. But we don't know. So we just know that it says the majority and that it would be a private school otherwise. Doing it for a couple of days a week, I think certainly fits within the guideline. The parent is responsible for the majority of what's going on, and you are allowed to kind of delegate some of that stuff, or hire somebody else to do parts of it for your kid. It's just, it gets tricky when they're in group settings. So my fear is that some of those places, 2020, the pandemic hit within 6 months of that whole landscape change in homeschooling. And I don't think the state education department is even cognizant that this is going on until somebody does something wrong. and I'm hoping it's not something as egregious as like a child is abused, but I have a feeling that that might be the triggering event, that some of these places are going to be found to be either illegal private schools or illegal daycares. I don't know. I don't think it's going to be the parents that get in trouble. I don't think, you know, parents are going to be fined for using them or anything, but they might either be shut down or forced to register or, you know, become compliant with the private school laws in New York, which means, you know, the whole vaccine and the same thing that you need to go to public school. So that, to me, I'm curious to see what happens, because at the same time, I'm fully supportive of parental rights and that every parent should make a decision for what works best for their family. And I like to see the creativity that has come up in ways to, you know, how do we still work? How do we still, you know, I don't know how to teach these subjects. How do I still get that done? For some families, it's really important to have their kids in groups of kids, you know, around their age. And so these places, and you know, PEL Prep certainly fills that need, and some do it better than others, I think. But I am curious to see, and I know in the other states, you know, you hear words like pods or micro schools. You know, some states are a little bit more wishy-washy over what those words mean. And in some states, because of the way public school funding works, homeschoolers get money from the government to pay for their curriculum or their extracurricular activities. And I know in a lot of places that sounds wonderful, right? Who doesn't want a couple of extra $1,000, right? For those piano lessons or the horseback riding lessons that we can't afford, or the microscope, or whatever class that you want your kid to take. But what we know from the way the government runs and has run is that anything it funds, it rules. And in New York, we already have a lot of hoops that we have to jump through to homeschool legally. And I can't imagine that it could be worse, but it could be. It absolutely could be. There could be more frequent testing. There could be required physical medical exams for a child every year, that somebody has to, you know, lay eyes on your child, that if you're going to accept money, you're now accountable to where that money comes from. So that may be a second threat that I see. I see it creeping up in other states. That you know, what it means to be a homeschooler in some states is not legally defined. And so like you have an incident like in California where you can be a charter school student. So you literally are following the public school education and subject to all of those regulations, and they're paying for your student to partake in this education, and your child is at home every single day doing their schoolwork. And those families call themselves homeschoolers. But in California, that's not, you can homeschool without any money at all and with free choice over your curriculum and not be accountable to the state. And so there's a fine line between, well, who's really a homeschooler? And some of those people are offended at the fact that I don't consider you a homeschooler. HSLDA doesn't consider you a homeschooler. So making that delineation might become more difficult as time goes on. If you see, Colorado has these public-private school partnerships where you can go into the local public school and take an art class or a drama class or things like that. So as they start to blur the lines between what's truly private education and what's public, I think will become a little bit more detrimental to free homeschooling. And even in New York, we still do have free homeschooling, because even though we have to fulfill these requirements, how you do it and when you do it is entirely up to you. And so to me, that's important to maintain. So not to be kind of drawn in and entranced by the carrot of the couple of $1,000s, or, you know, well, it's my tax money, right? Well, I'm sorry, once you give it to the government, it really is no longer your money, it's their money. I mean, you know, you can argue over how much of it you give them and you don't want to give them. Maybe the only thing I could get behind would be a tax credit, because that truly is like you get to keep your own money. But then again, you know, for a state like New Jersey, where you don't have to prove anything to homeschool, well, now in order to get a tax credit, you have to do something to prove you homeschool. So now you've just increased the homeschool regulations in that state. You know, in New York, it feels like it could be a little bit more feasible to do a tax credit because, gosh, we send them 7 pieces of paper every year. You think it's easy to prove you're a homeschooler to just get, like, you know, $500 off your tax return or whatever. But I think, you know, this private, public money should follow the kid. You know, it sounds good, but I think that might actually undo true homeschooling freedom.
because I've spoken to Rob about this, but I'd be curious to hear your side of it as well. He would like someone to start up a chapter out east.
Yeah.
So I know, there's a couple of parents, same age range as my son. What does it entail other than I think you need like 2 founding member families, or like what are some of the expectations of starting up a chapter?
Yeah, so like I said, Homeschool New York, Leah, we are a Christian organization, and so our board is bound by a statement of faith, and that includes our chapter leaders. So all of our board positions are held by couples, and I would say 99.9% of our chapter leadership positions are held by couples. So that is kind of like the ideal, but there have been situations where, we have like 2 married moms where the husbands really don't, have the time or the ability to pour into a chapter, and so they're co-chapter leaders. So we certainly can, work with different situations as is needed. But the way our chapters work is it's the chapter leaders who are the true members of the organization, so they're accountable to the board. And the way our board structure is that we have the state divided into 7 regions. Actually, no, we just added an 8th region. We made New York City its own region. So we have the Long Island region, and each region has a regional rep. Right now, Long Island is without an elected regional rep, so Rob and I have been appointed to fill in until we find. So the regional reps are the ones that help people set up chapters. So you would contact us, and we can show you, what's in the chapter leaders manual, what's required, how it works. Talk to you about, what it means to adhere to the statement of faith, and know that when you have a group of families getting together, inevitably there might be conflict or things that need to be dealt with. The regional reps and even the board are there to kind of help you navigate through those things. One of the benefits of being associated with the state organization as a chapter is that we have what we call D&O insurance, and we have a policy that apparently they don't even write anymore. It's directors and officers, which basically means that if somebody is like really unhappy with how you treated them in your chapter, or some conflict arose and they didn't like the way it was resolved, and they turn around and they want to sue you, you're not personally liable. You're covered by the D&O insurance. And I think, as time goes on and more people feel discriminated against, it probably becomes more of a realistic, like, oh good, it's good to know that like my house and my car and my savings account are not going to be at risk of being raided because you're covered by the organization. We cover insurance for your chapter activities too, especially if you're using a facility. So for groups that meet in a church, oftentimes these facilities want a certificate of additional insured. We provide that. So that if there's any damage to the facility, again, your group is not held personally liable. It can be covered by the organization. We have another type of insurance that it doesn't come into play too often, but it's called a sports liability insurance. And so even for chapters that don't have sports, we still document how many kids you have doing things. But that basically covers those areas when somebody is hurt and maybe your medical costs go above and beyond what your insurance might pay for, as if it happened at an event and it's a member. So it's not something that comes up a whole lot, but a couple of years ago we had somebody fall at a graduation and hit their head and have a serious injury. So it kicked in for helping out with the care of that person. So there are 3 levels of insurance that you get by being a group associated with a state organization. Just in addition to the multiple benefits, we handed out the paper that has all the benefits of being a member, having the backup of Christian, godly counselors and a board that will be there for you, and just knowing that you're connected across the state to other homeschoolers and can learn from them. We do for chapter leaders, we have 2 meetings a year that are required, mandatory. One is a virtual meeting. It's our business meeting, but we meet online, and in addition to just like voting on the budget and things like that, we will talk about pertinent events. Honestly, we're going to be meeting with some of our chapter leaders in the next couple of weeks. We have some chapters struggling with families who have children who have gender identity issues, and they don't know what to do. They want to help these families. They want to, remain true to who they are and what they believe about how God created us, but they want to minister to these families. So we're providing an outlet to have that discussion. So we support our chapter leaders that way. Our fall meeting, the required meeting, is actually an in-person meeting. We call it Fall Fellowship. And it's, again, we have our business meeting, but we spend the rest of the time doing some fun things together, but we may bring in a speaker or hold some workshops that are like directly related to leadership development and maybe conflict resolution, or how to grow your chapter, how to disciple future leaders, things like that. So we try and invest in our leadership so that they can invest in their leadership and go back to their groups and feel like, okay, I've got all these things covered. So that's the benefit of being, a chapter leader in our organization.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Hi, Jen. I had a couple general homeschooling questions. But first off, thank you for all the work you do and all the work the HSLDA does behind the scenes, as moms like me are just like trucking through the day, oblivious of all the stuff swirling around New York. You're doing all that hard work to ensure that we are allowed to do this. I didn't know that New York State had the most hoops to jump through, but I'm not surprised.
Shouldn't surprise us.
I'm definitely not surprised. So my questions are, I have the benefit of knowing your lovely daughter, and my kids are getting older. I have high school looming around the corner, and I'm new to homeschooling. I was wondering if you could either tell us about or tell us where to find information about if these kids choose to go to college. My daughter said to her friend the other day, if I go to college, and her friend was like, if? What else? What are you talking about? But that's not a given for us. But if they do, it would be nice to do, as I think Abby's doing, like a dual degree in high school and an associate's degree, or getting college credits in high school. I know nothing about this, but if they choose that path, would like to have that opportunity, where would I find information about that?
First, you're going to come to the conference and hear the high school coordinator talk about all of these things.
Definitely.
But I'll talk specifically about New York, because there is that roadblock of like, can you get into any college you want to in New York? And I would say like 99% of the time, you're fine. I know so many people whose kids have gone to SUNYs with even just the letter of completion. Stony Brook accepts the letter of completion. It doesn't have to say substantial equivalence. Farmingdale is really kind of, right, they just need to know that you have what you're supposed to have. But I'll tell you, we had a board member in the summer of 2020, of all times. She graduated. She had taken 24 credits, duly enrolled in John Jay College. She was going in for criminal justice. She had applied to St. John's University. She had a stellar SAT score. She qualified to benefit from their honors program. She was eligible for scholarships from St. John's based on her academic performance. And June came, and they wanted her final transcript and her letter of substantial equivalence. Well, she lives in Queens. So she got the letter from the state, the City Board of Education, that said the student has been homeschooled in New York City and is beyond compulsory education, compulsory age, and has completed their education, and talk to the parents about the rest of the information, and then that's it. At that time, we were having regular conversations with the assistant commissioner of the state education department, who is over private schools, P12, and then homeschooling kind of falls under her. And we would tell her time and time again that this comes up, this comes up, this comes up, and she's like, when it happens, just let me know. She goes, we'll talk to the school district, we'll get it handled. She goes, I fully agree with you. They should write the letter. We'll talk to them. Well, it turns out the state education department really has no jurisdiction over the city board of education, because it's mayoral run. And there are 7 school district cities across New York that are out of the jurisdiction of the state education department. These are things that I just learned in the last couple of years. So she called, she begged, she talked to their lawyer, she talked to St. John's. She told St. John's, you can matriculate this student. She has this letter is sufficient. And St. John says, no, if we're ever audited by the state, this is not enough. And she's like, I am the state. You can take this letter, believe me. They would not budge. So she tried talking to the lawyer for the city. She tried talking to the lawyer for St. John. She talked to the admissions council. She talked to Bill Harrington, who's the head of homeschooling in New York City. Nobody would budge. So this stellar, brilliant student, now in the middle of a pandemic, fortunately, she was able to find us a location for her to take the GED exam, and that's what she did. And apparently there are different levels of passing the GED exam, and she passed with, either honors or whatever it is that they call it. And within, I don't know, like 4 days of the deadline of when she had to have all her stuff in to be eligible for the scholarship, and she was able to, St. John's was her dream school, and at that moment she was willing to do whatever it took, and she did. But she does fear that she kind of has this little asterisk that she has a GED. So it's wrong that that's the way it should go. I would say this is where it really does benefit to have contact with homeschoolers that are in your school district, especially anybody who's a little further down the road. Find out, does the school district write the letter? If not, why? A lot of people who are newer to homeschooling, you have maybe a closer connection to the people who are on the Board of Education. I don't know anybody on my Board of Education because my kids never went to school in the district, but if you know who those families are, plant a seed in their head and say, look, this is a simple thing. We're not asking them to say, our education sucks, even though it does, and I'm sorry, but it's not, it's like some superintendents take those words, substantial equivalence, and take it as like a judgment on their own ability to educate students, and they think, there's no way you could do what I do. And that's not even what it says. It just says, she did what she was supposed to do to fulfill the regulations. She did all the classes. She filed all the paperwork. And by the definition of the regulations themselves, if you go back and look at the first paragraph, the regulations, it says the whole reason they were developed was to assist school districts in evaluating the substantial equivalence of an education being provided at home. That's why they exist, in addition to determining the competency of the instructor. So the inference is that if you're complying with the regulations, you are substantially equivalent and you are competent. They've admitted it by accepting your paperwork. So why can't they just write a simple little sentence at the end of the 4 years that says, yeah, that's what they did. So sometimes you have to get a little bit creative then, I guess, if you don't get the letter. But I know that there are private schools in New York that don't do what St. John's did. I was led to believe that it was always just like the SUNYs and the CUNYs, but I was surprised when it was St. John's too. But there certainly are private schools in New York that really don't care about the letter. Most of them are going to be Christian schools, I'll be honest. And then out of state, most out of state schools, when you go, there's like a whole separate, like you're a homeschool student, click this link and this is what we want to see from you. They might ask for a little bit more information about what curriculum you use because they don't know how to evaluate what's on your transcript. But again, this is an area where I say it just kind of flies in the face of my experience that we don't have millions of parents lying about, A's on their kids' transcript because if anything, they're harder on their kids than anybody else is, and maybe they're reluctant to give them an A because they think they don't deserve it. But your entry exams and your other academically related, merit-based stuff is going to be reflected. So if your transcript matches what else your child is showing them as far as being ready for college, your SAT scores or your ACT or anything like that, parents are not lying on their transcript, and there's no reason to believe that they would be. So out of state, it's really just not an issue. You can get into many colleges easily, and there are a lot of very homeschool friendly colleges. I mean, I picked ones that I knew were extremely homeschool friendly. My boys wanted to go to Christian schools, so my one went to Patrick Henry, which is basically HSLDA's college, and then my other one went to Liberty. And my son who went to Liberty, he's the only one who graduated from my homeschool that year. He got a valedictorian scholarship to Liberty. So that just goes to show you how homeschool friendly they really are. So I don't know if that helps, but we were asking about dual enrollment.
Yeah.
And honestly, I would say even since 2020, I think there are way more options because more schools are now offering stuff online. So there's two ways of doing dual enrollment. The most common way is like this a la carte, where you just like maybe take a couple of classes. Especially for a high school student, that might be the ones that you want your kid to take that you have no ability to teach or no desire to teach. So in my house, that was AP English, it was economics, computer programming, things like that. So my sons did online college credit earning classes. Abby, like you mentioned right now, she's actually dually enrolled at Liberty in their associates track. There aren't that many schools that do associates. I'm really only aware of 3 right now, but I think that the list is growing. It's a little bit different, and I will say now that we're halfway through it, I'm a little not completely satisfied, but it's doing what she wants to do, which is just kind of like get down the road quicker, because she's doubling up on, you know, when I graduate high school, I'm going to have an associate's degree, so then I can get my bachelor's degree that much faster. The problem with a lot of the classes, and this is true whether you're taking a la carte classes or doing it this way, it's very common for online college classes to be what they call asynchronous, which means you're not on a classroom schedule where you have like a lecture time scheduled that you attend or anything. It's like the assignments are given to you a week at a time, and you have to work on it on your own and submit it on your own. You know, we're just finding that lack of interaction kind of unsatisfying. There are professors that oversee the classes. You have to email them in order to get questions answered, and you know, it may take a day or two before you hear back from them, so that's a little frustrating. With Liberty particularly, there's not even like, you don't buy a textbook or rent a textbook. They have all of their material on their platform, which is fine because you're not laying out extra money for textbooks, but the poor kid is sitting in front of a screen like hours on end. It's not like she can take her science book and go to the couch and get comfortable and read her assignment. It's all on the screen. She's now going to a chiropractor for her neck. So there's pros and cons, but certainly for a very highly motivated high school student, to me, it makes sense to at least throw in some dual enrollment classes, because they do get you down the road faster. If you're already going to take a science class or an English class or an economics class, why not earn college credit for it? But I think you have to know your kid is motivated enough to do it. The other option, HSLDA has an online academy that has classes for 8th grade on up, and they don't issue college credit for them, but they do have AP level classes, so there is that ability to earn college credit or college placement if you take the exam and get a good enough score on it. Their classes are interactive, so we did like those better. There actually was a once a week time scheduled where the professor was talking to the whole class. There was a chat bar on the side of the screen, and the students could talk to each other and ask questions and interact over the material that was being presented, and it really felt more like a classroom setting, but not particular college credit earning classes, so there's that.
And then, yeah, I had a quick question. Totally agree with what you said about academics being secondary to shaping character and the relationship. Not willing to sacrifice relationship over cursive or a science project anymore. But when you spoke about the siblings, as sweet as my girls look to outsiders, they always tell me they're so sweet, they fight. And I was wondering if you have, what you did with, because what I admire most about your family, Abby's so impressive, but is what I hear of your relationships, what you did to foster those sibling and family relationships.
So we did have our moments. And the most surprising moment was I found out that, you know, it's personality types that sometimes interact more than anything else. And my oldest, who's now 28 but was 10 when Abby was born, they are the male and female version of each other. And I remember when she was 5 that he would like get on her case about things, and I'd look at him and I'd go, she's 5 years old, leave her alone, you know, nobody talked to you that way when you were 5, you know, you're expecting way too much. So there were times where I was like really surprised that the greatest sibling rivalry that happened in my house were with the ones that were 10 years apart. So we did have our moments. I think we had some academic subjects that were done together. I think that helped. I think it's natural to have conflict, but, you know, modeling your own maybe godly method of dealing with conflict and talking about those things. I think somebody told me once, sometimes if you're having a particular problem with your kid, it's time to talk to God about it with yourself. I don't know. I have found that to be true sometimes. I'm not inferring anything about you, but it might be something that's not just one kid or 2 kids. It might be something that's, you know, a bigger issue. Or just something that needs to be prayed about and talked about, and, you know, let that be the lesson for a while, right? And, you know, the thing that I've been taught is that, you know, you can have friends outside your family, but, you know, your siblings are forever. And I don't have that with my brother, and so that's kind of the thing that I kind of keep bringing back to them is like, I don't have a relationship with my brother, and I'm really sad about that, and I don't want you guys to have that. I want you to be close, and I want you to talk to each other, and I want you to do things together. So you know, it's not a short-term solution. It's a long-term kind of vision for where they're going to get. But certainly, you know, praying about it and, you know, taking advantage of the times when they do get along and pointing it out how well it works, you know. Sometimes my girls will be arguing all day long, and then we'll be in bed at 10 o'clock and hearing them, and they're so happy to be together. And I'm like, where were those two girls all day? Always. So you know what? I told you, we don't homeschool because we like getting up early, and some of that is because we do go to bed late, because sometimes those are the best times. And I just have learned to let the best times happen when they happen, you know.
And you know how Jen mentioned personality types? A really fun thing that I think made us all understand each other better was at Gospel Community Church many years ago, they had someone come in, and it was for couples. I don't know if one of my adult kids may have come, I don't know, or my teens may have come. I think it was just Dave and I at the time. We did this personality test, and I had been married, 27 years, and I thought I really knew my husband, but after taking the test, it really enlightened me, because I really had never done that, to what made him tick, and him enlightened him to what made me tick, and we got copies and brought it home. And as a family, we took the test, and it was so much fun, just kind of taking this test, which with all these random questions, and then getting our answers to what personality types we are. And then you looked at really your child differently. They looked at each other differently. They looked at us differently, because there really is something to the personality and how you interact with each other. And it might be fun for you guys to do as a family. And I'll find out which ones. Pastor Jason knows them.
Okay. I was going to say, too, HSLDA, one of their consultants is Lanissa James, and she's a homeschooler in Maryland with 5 or 6 kids, and she has I don't know if it's a certification or whatever, I forget his first name, John Maxwell, and out of that, I think, has come. The particular one I'm thinking of is the one where you find out if you're an INTF or what, right? I forget what that's called. But her name is Lanissa James, and she's on the HSLDA website, and I think her own website is like lanissajames.com or something like that. It's not a hard name to confuse with somebody else. But she actually has a private consulting business that she does, where you can call her up and say, hey, we want to do this, and we want to learn more about our personality, strengths and how they interact with each other. There's another one that we did a few years ago. We did this with our chapter leaders. We brought in Walk Through the Bible, and they have a seminar that's based on the 4 personality types, and each one is exemplified in somebody from the Bible. So I think one was Paul, one was Peter, one was Abraham. I'm trying to remember what the other one was. But you have the leader, the kind of, the one who sets the vision and kind of gets everybody going in motion, but can't be bogged down in the details. So they have this, we're going to do this, and then everybody's expected to go do it. Then you have the person who's a little bit more sensitive to the people around them. So the lion, or that kind of lion personality, they might kind of stamp on people from time to time because they forget to consider people's feelings. But then there's another personality type that really is more drawn to it doesn't matter how we get it done, as long as we're understanding and fulfilling, and and then you have the one who is bogged down in details and has every step planned out, and usually those are those engineer types that they have to see how it's going to work and how that is all going to play out. And then I forget what the other one is, but they're abbreviated with a D, an I, an S, and a C. Okay, and with those 4 areas, most people are strongest in one, and then have a second one that's a little bit weaker, and then not at all the other 2. Like the other 2 would be considered almost like your opposite. And what was really good about the Walk Through the Bible is, especially with the D. So I'm a D. I wasn't surprised to find out I'm a D, but I was always kind of made to feel that being that personality type was like a bad thing, that I have to tone it down a little bit. I can't be such a D, But then learning all of the strengths and all of the value that those Ds bring to the equation, but then just being reminded that, all right, you're probably not as aware of what's going on in the minds and hearts of the S's. So this is an area that God is calling you to just kind of take a breath and pay more attention to what's going on around you. You can still be who you're going to be, but you have to figure out what the people around you are thinking and feeling and act accordingly. And so it was really helpful for that.
I just have a very quick question going back to what Heather said. So the letter of substantial equivalence, right? Is that it? Is that something that just the superintendent is the one who makes the decision to write, or does that have to go through the Board of Education?
No, so the Board of Education is really only involved in the homeschooling process when there's an unresolved issue over how the parent has been decided to comply with the regulations. So usually it's like your IHIP was not accepted, and they told you you have to fix XYZ, and you either fix XYZ or you say XYZ is not in the regulations, and if they don't agree, then you can appeal to your Board of Education. You can also appeal to them over the consent of the person for giving the end of the year evaluation, because the regulations say it can be an other person, and so that's always been understood that the parent could be. So that's where the Board of Ed comes in. But if you know that you have a superintendent who maybe is reluctant to write it, I would certainly maybe contact somebody on the Board of Ed and say, hey, can we influence this decision?
I'm the opposite. Like my superintendent, I feel like he would write it no problem, but there's a few people on that board that if they were involved, I could see them.
Then I would just, do you do all your communicating through the superintendent's office, or do they,
I've communicated with him quite some bit.
So HSLDA, and this is something that's on our website, and it's free. If you go to leah.org or homeschoolnewyork.org, under the regulations tab, there's a couple of clicks in there. You can get our regulatory manual. It's like an 80-page document. You can print it if you want to, but it's just always there online. You can see it. And this past year, we added in some information that HSLDA has put together. They actually have like a pre-letter that you can use to send to your superintendent and say, hey, I really want the letter, and this is what it would entail, and this is what you would write, and this is how I can show you that I've, proven to you that remember I sent you all this paperwork, so that's there.
Still, but I guess I have a few years.
Yeah, I would say by the end of the junior year, beginning of the senior year, you probably should start asking, can I get this letter from you at the end when I've done all this? Yeah.
Or with my IHIP for senior year of high school, I just send, please be aware, because I'll send a cover letter, and it's just say, please be aware that, so-and-so is completing their homeschool studies, and we will need the letter of substantial equivalence at the end of the year, and that's it. And also, to piggyback on what Heather had said, you can't dual enroll in Liberty till you've completed 10th grade, so you're fine with that. And also, most colleges have a homeschool link, and what they want is different for every school. So if you want to just start checking out schools and see what they want and kind of shape because also, since you don't go to public school, you don't need a printout of a transcript that's the same for every school. So if you're applying to different schools, you can adjust your transcript to look like what they want from homeschoolers. So they'll have a link, and then I have one student with 2 different transcripts depending on the school,
And I just want to say, with one of my children, she applied to multiple state schools and a private college, and every single school accepted her. We did get the letter from West Islip School District. It was my transcript. She did her portfolio. She was an art major, but there was no problem.
We didn't have any problems either.
Yeah.
West Islip writes a really good letter.
Yeah.
The school my one son goes to never even asked for a letter, and they gave a scholarship.
Yeah. Any other questions? Just raise your hand high. I'll bring you the mic. This is your opportunity. Anything burning? Okay. All right.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure. And I hope to see you all on June 10th and 11th.